Okay, so I'm so excited to have our first episode of Conversations with Kate.
Yay. Thank you, Ross.
Exciting. So we listened to a episode of the Coaching Studio by Lyssa deHart, and her guest on it was Dr. Relly Nadler.
That was so super cool.
Yes, and entitled Mastering the Moment. So that's what we've called this episode. So I think, kicking off, I think we talk a lot about emotional intelligence.
Hmm.
You hear that all the time, emotional intelligence. But what really struck me is, well, how do we practically do something about our emotional intelligence? How do
Yeah.
we increase our emotional intelligence?
Would you like one of my thoughts from the podcast?
Sure.
I was inspired by you when you sent me your drawing that you listen and draw.
Hmm.
This is a terrible drawing, but for people listening, I don't think you can see it anyway. He talked about turbulence,
Mm.
tools for turbulence.
Tools
So,
of turbulence.
and we're international school educators, so we're on planes all the time, right?
Hmm.
And I thought, and then he talked about moment mastery.
Moment mastery.
And I can just see this. You're on the plane, and when the turbulence happens, we often have to master our emotions in the moment, not to go like, oh, the plane's gonna crash, the plane's gonna crash. So
Mm.
that that metaphor and that picture of, there's turbulence and we have tools and our emotional intelligence can come in the moment.
Hmm.
And I also liked what I drew on, like, turbulence is usually temporary.
Mm.
I've only been on one flight to Australia where it felt like there was consistent turbulence. So yeah, like what do you think of that? Having a mental
Hmm.
picture in your mind.
I think that's a great metaphor. And I think, like, as school leaders, we just go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And sometimes it feels like you're putting out fires all the time, like it's a crisis. Next,
Yes.
the next thing, the next thing.
Yes.
But when you think about it, they're not really.
No.
No. But we're just going so fast that it sometimes seems like that. It seems turbulent the whole time. So how do we create that space? That's
Oh, I love that question because as one of my big learnings from being ahead of school was that the more problems I solved, the more problems that came to my office.
mm-hmm.
And the quicker and the faster I solved problems, the quicker and the faster they came. So
Mm-hmm.
that's where enter the coaching mindset.
Exactly. Exactly. And when people become almost addicted or dependent on your problem solving.
Yes. And you're not giving agency. And
Hmm.
we both work in have worked in schools with the International Baccalaureate where we want students to have agency. We
Mm.
want teachers to have agency, and simply providing answers
Mm.
doesn't work. And Relly Nadler had a great metaphor for this at the end toward the end of the podcast, the ask and drain about the buckets.
Mm.
He was saying that people have buckets full of solutions,
Mm.
right? And so he said, you just ask, drain them of all their solutions before offering yours.
Which is something you do in coaching, right? Tell me more.
Exactly.
Other option. What else? What else? Right? And then ask for permission to give your input, I suppose. So what I'm also feeling is also that idea of mindfulness,
Yeah.
of building in space in the day. I know as a school leader, my timetable's like chock-a-block, one thing to the next, to the
Yes.
and if I create space between meetings and really am intentional about preparing for them,
Yes.
they go so much, yeah, they go better, right?
Absolutely.
And I find if I'm not prepared and I go in, then my default is to give answers, give direction, take over, because you're not ready to ask questions. You're not ready to listen.
Yes.
Yeah. So that mindfulness practice for me is quite important, having that couple of minutes. And I know Lyssa in the podcast talks about it, how often it's better just to do 2 minutes a day, 20 times a day.
Yeah,
Hmm.
absolutely. And so it can even be, I would often do a walking meditation. And just from my most recent experience, the bathroom that I had to go to, any of the bathrooms were quite far, up and down steps and across buildings. And so I would often use that as, or because sometimes, you've got a big campus, you've got an elevator. We may have to be doing this while we're traveling, but we can use that time
Mm.
intentionally.
We're very lucky here at VSA. We have a beautiful view. So
Yeah.
at the harbor, and I can just walk out there. We have a flagpole, and often I'll be just sitting there having a few mindful minutes, and then a little person will wander up to me. What are you up to, Mr. Dawson? Have a little chat with me. That sort of, gives me space between meetings. So this idea of having space and some mindfulness.
Yes.
And then once you've created that gap, having some intentionality for what you're going into.
Absolutely. And do you know what the neuroscience says with that space? And I think we talked about it in our previous calls about those automatic negative thoughts, the
Hmm.
ants that
Yeah.
you've written about. When you take space, you are disrupting the neural pathways.
Mm-hmm.
So when we're just racing and racing, and this is stressful, we have automatic negative thoughts. I got to get to this meeting. It's going to be a difficult conversation. I don't want to do it. When we give space between meetings,
Mm-hmm.
then we're disrupting that
Mm-hmm.
neural network.
Exactly. And I like one of the things Lyssa said in here in the podcast. We can't learn from feedback if we're in a reactive state.
Yes.
So we can't listen if we're in a reactive state. We aren't open to ideas if we're in a reactive state. So really, moment mastery is how do you then, you know, deal with that moment when something happens. Now, sometimes it's a emergency, right? But very
Yeah.
few times. So you've got to jump into emergency mode, fight or flight. But usually it isn't. But our natural reaction when we've been going is to
Yes.
get an answer straight away. So this mindfulness and these spaces in the day. And I think one thing that I've begun doing is actually leaving timetabled slots in between.
Great.
Hmm. And I used to feel really guilty about it, about closing my door just for 5 minutes because you have a
Mhm.
door policy, but actually closing that door for 5 minutes and practicing some mindfulness really, when the next person does come to the door, you have that space. You're
Absolutely.
in a receptive frame of mind, I suppose.
And just your energy will be so different.
Hmm.
I can remember back to being a teacher, and it can be quite scary to have to approach um, a leader in your school with something that you feel really
Hmm.
is it. I mean, it might not be the leader's biggest issue, but it's your biggest issue.
Hmm.
Something's happened with your students in your class,
Hmm.
and you want to be taken seriously. And if you come in and that leader is already stressed, that stress can just kind of amplify in the environment.
Exactly. And love one of the tools that Relly introduced in the podcast was this acronym VIVID.
Yes.
Yeah. So V being it's really an acronym for okay, that person coming in to see you when they say, "Have you got a moment?"
Yep.
You know, most of the time we think that person wants our opinion.
Yes.
What they don't really want our opinion, so they want different things. So, you know, the acronym VIVID that he's created cleverly, V stands for vent. Sometimes people just want to vent.
Absolutely.
That's okay. And we shouldn't get attached to that. Just because someone's venting doesn't mean they're complaining.
Yes.
And often you'll have conversations with a person venting and you go, would you like, what would you like to do now? You know, I don't want to do
I'm
anything. I
curious.
wanted to get it off my chest, right? And then I as information. So they might want some information about something, which is just an answer. Validation, the next V,
Yeah.
they've actually got an idea and they want you to listen to it. But if you start firing off your ideas, they're not getting that validation. Then ideation, they want to brainstorm with you. And then D, direction or decision. I
Yes.
think that's a really good acronym. And I've made a little poster that I'll share in the
Like the
links
post.
as along with links to Dr. Relly Nadler's website and information as well. So I think there's a really good way of thinking about how do you feel about the acronym?
I love it. And I'll show you what I did in my drawing and I'll describe it to listeners. So my terrible drawing is the plane. And
Hmm.
there's, sometimes the term turbulence, but in that turbulence, we can have moment mastery. And then I've got the pilot because, the automatic negative thoughts are when we go on autopilot. But our
Mm.
goal is to be driving towards a vivid,
Mm.
the plane is going to, you want to have this vivid view, right? So
Fantastic.
that's just a picture to hold in my mind, like to remember to
Mm.
stop and
Mm.
not be on autopilot, but to be looking out into the landscape going, does this
Yeah.
person want to vent? And do you know, this isn't just in schools. This isn't just with employees or employers, but I can do this with my own kids.
Mm. Mm.
Or, you could do it with your husband, you know,
Yeah.
like, are they right now coming to me because they're venting?
Mm.
And I can just give them space to be seen, heard, felt, acknowledged. Do they need information from me?
Hmm.
Do they want validation or ideation or direction or
Mm.
decision?
Mm.
I love it. I think that is
Yeah.
very clear for me on how I can have moment mastery. And
Hmm.
one of the things I like that it does is it changes the focus from oftentimes when we're listening, when we're going into fight or flight mode, we're like, is this it like instead of thinking, does this person need to vent? We're
Hmm.
thinking, are they attacking me?
Hmm.
Is there a criticism in here? A criticism of the school, a criticism of me, a criticism? What are they criticizing? But
Hmm.
if you realize and you just take that moment and that pause, do they need to vent? You're going to actually be able to hear what they say without bias.
Yeah. I'm ready for a vivid conversation. Which one is it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And really talks about working with one leader who actually had it written down. So he'd say to the person when they came in, which one are you here for?
Yeah.
you know so it's that determinant, and really we should encourage the people we work with to tell us when they're coming in, I'm here to vent. Okay, then you know what it's here for. You can sit back, right? Or I'm here to get some directions. We should encourage them to use that language, so it's actually a language you can use with your staff.
Absolutely.
you know yeah. Oh, yeah, so I think that was a really good tool. There was another one that he introduced called the emotional audit,
Yes.
which is sort of 5 steps of thinking. The first one, stopping and going, what am I thinking now?
Hmm.
The second one, which is more meta awareness. So, first one, metacognition, what am I thinking now? The second one, meta awareness, what am I feeling now? Hmm. Then the third one, what do I want right now? Okay, what do I want to happen right now? And then what's getting in my way right now? Combination of attention and awareness. And then the fifth one, what do I need now to be my best? Which is really deep awareness, isn't it? So, you know, it's taking that 15, 20 seconds in a moment just to stop and say, oh, what am I thinking now? What am I feeling now? What do I want right now? What's getting in my way? Hmm. And what do I need now to be my best?
And that really reminds me of the power of coaching. And
Mm-hmm.
what I feel that is in my language would be self-coaching,
Mm-hmm.
asking yourself coaching questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And these are similar questions a coach would ask you, right?
Yeah.
And if you can get down to I suppose, what's getting in my way right now, that's real self-awareness, right? You're looking at patterns. And once you start to see patterns, you can start to change.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Relly Nadler said. He said, then you notice, is there a pattern here?
Hmm. Hmm. And then, you know, so going back to our beginning of the conversation, one thing that resonated, he said, is we're all on autopilot, but autopilot equals average.
Yes.
If you
Yeah,
want to be better than you are now, you've got to come off autopilot.
autopilot.
So mastering that moment is coming off autopilot.
Yeah.
It's almost as Gavin Griff says in Emerge, and I think we'll talk about that in another episode.
Yes.
It's recognizing what Eckhart Tolle called the ego, right? But
Hmm.
stepping away from that, recognizing it's not yours, and looking back
Yes.
as a third person almost.
Yes. Because those are just parts of ourself that are wanting attention.
Mm,
Our thinking wants attention. Our feelings want attention. So if we give it attention, we're no longer resisting it. Because if we don't acknowledge thoughts, oftentimes they persist.
mm, mm-hmm, mm. Awesome. So, just to sum up, what are some of the major takeaways that you have from this podcast?
I have my airplane metaphor, which reminds me that when something goes wrong, it's just turbulence. It's going to
Mm-hmm.
be temporary, but I have an opportunity to master that moment. And for me, it's the metaphor makes me like giggle a little. It's just like, I love being up in the air. I
I
love
can
being,
see you with a little pilot's hat,
yes.
hoping you played.
And then, not I don't want to be average. So I want to get off autopilot. I now have the Vivid tool
Mm-hmm.
for the way I interact with others, but
Mm-hmm.
also the questions for self-coaching myself that are quite I think powerful when practiced
Mm-hmm.
persistently.
And practice is the key, isn't it? And I think, what really resonates for me is this mastery in the moment and
Hmm.
taking that gap. But also, you're not always going to get it right.
Yeah.
As leaders, we often beat ourselves up
Hmm.
when we get it wrong. We catastrophize, those ants come in, like you said,
Yeah.
but it's all a work in progress. So sometimes you might master the moment, sometimes you won't, but it's that stepping away and reflecting and thinking, okay, what could I do a little bit better?
Yeah.
And what I loved about Relly's work is that it gives you actual tools,
Yes.
you know?
And he told stories. His stories
Mm.
to me were really powerful. And I know we're summing up here, but just about the power of that moment, he was talking about how things coaches said to him in the moment mattered for a really long time, and that we
Mm.
have power with the way we use our words
Mm.
to encourage others or to destroy others
Mm. Yeah. So it's in that moment can last for someone else forever, forever,
forever.
forever.
Like
Yeah.
I'm sure you can remember, I'm sure everyone listening can remember a moment when
Hmm.
somebody said something that made you angry and that you felt was unfair or unjust.
Hmm. And I think that's why it's really important that, you know, if those moments do happen, that we go back and find that person. We circle back and you say,
Yes.
look, I'm really sorry.
Yeah,
That's not how I wanted it to come out. Apologize for your actions, right?
absolutely.
Because that could heal that moment for them.
Yeah.
Mm. Yeah. So, and I also like, I want to go back to the bucket metaphor that
Yes.
I touched on before about draining the other person's bucket before you start on your own.
Yeah. What else could you do?
Mhm.
He has a great story when he was coaching, which this is the power of coaching.
Mhm.
I would love to see every leader worldwide have a coach, every teacher have a coach. Um, he was coaching a leader and he said, well, what would it be like if you just listen to their solutions instead of giving your own solution and then saying, okay, go off and do that. And he said the manager or the leader said people were leaving his office on cloud nine
Mhm.
and his energy was spent in asking them questions
Mhm.
instead of feeling that need to be responsible to solve everything.
Exactly. And then where people came in for, in the vivid acronym, the D before the decision, next time they'll come back for validation. Hey, I've got this idea.
Yes.
What do you think?
Yeah.
You know? So rather than coming for an answer, they're coming with a solution.
Yes. That's something I worked so hard on. Like let's have a solution mindset.
Hmm.
Yeah. And so if you're talking to people in your family or people in your organization or people in your school about Vivid, it also, you might say you have an open door policy, but people will often not know what they can come to you with.
Mm.
And now that gives them, you know, five possibilities. I'm coming to you for validation.
Hmm.
I want to know that what I'm doing in my classroom is right. Or I'm coming to you for a decision. I need to make a decision about this child. And
Mm. Definitely. Well, thank you, Kate. I really enjoyed this. Is our first time. I was a bit nervous. So when I'm thinking about my emotional audit, I'm
yes.
thinking, how did this go? How am I feeling right now? I'm feeling a little bit nervous, but a little bit
Mhm.
brave.
Brave.
Yeah,
Yeah.
feeling a little bit brave. I'm feeling quite good that we've put it out there. And what do I want right now? I suppose that metacognition is, you know, I want to carry on doing more of this. I want to give more tools to leaders.
Yes.
Hmm. And what's getting in my way right now? Well, I think setting aside some more time, having more conversations, exploring more tools. And I think, hopefully these will be helpful to people and help them to become their best as well, because I'm learning a lot from these tools and conversations as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know one of the things you and I share is a strong, strong belief in coaching.
Oh, totally, and I think we can have a whole nother episode on why it's important for leaders to have coaches, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm feeling excited. I'm thinking about all the possibilities with using this tool. I'm going to use it immediately um, in my conversations, at least first with my kids using the Vivid tool.
Mm. And
Um,
love
and
to
what
see how that goes. That would be really
yes,
interesting.
yeah. And with my coaching clients,
Hmm.
this ask and drain,
Yes.
ask and drain, ask and drain. And I also teach coaching, and
Hmm.
I'm super excited to have another cohort starting soon, July 21st, 22nd. But I think giving coaches who are training to be coaches this self-coaching
Hmm.
moment mastery, because there are moments in coaching.
Hmm.
Somebody comes, and it's so typical. Somebody comes to you with the problem that you've been having.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so you need to have this awareness. What
Yeah.
am I thinking? What am I feeling? What
And
do I want?
and they're really tools for a coaching conversation, right?
Mhm.
As opposed to a coaching session, which is slightly different.
Yes, we talked about that as well, because cognitive coaching, which a lot of educators are familiar with, is more about a coaching conversation,
Hmm.
coaching.
Another episode in there somewhere, I think. So what I'll do is I'll link um, the coaching studio, Lyssa deHart, and their conversation. Also, Relly Nadler, I'll link to his work as well. And if anyone out there is looking for coaching or wants to have coaching conversation, Kate is amazing. I'm here as well. I'm available for coaching. So do reach out to us.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ross.
Pleasure as always.